welcome to Elite Grid. So, just like the last time around, we are going to continue with our discussion on parajumbles. Here again, we are going to take two really generic examples of parajumbles and try to learn new concepts with them. Today, we are going to talk about the basic premise that you should ideally start out by trying to figure out the starting as well as the ending sentences in a particular parajumble. Why this particular strategy works is that the starting sentences are relatively more generic, relatively more vague. At the same time, the ending sentences normally are conclusive in nature. So they will have some sort of concluding tone. They will have some words that are conclusive in nature, and they are also relatively spot. But also, you need to understand that this is not something that is always going to work out, but it still works for most of the cases. This is still a strategy that you should keep in your arsenal because this will help you to figure out a lot of paragraphs or at least a lot of mandatory pairs. So, taking a really generic example in this particular case, just to exemplify this point, we will go through this question. You can again pause out this particular video, try to solve this on your own, and then look at the explanation that I'm about to give. First and foremost, you need to go through all of these sentences, all of these statements, and one thing you will notice is that you are using a lot of indicative words such as that tires can release. So far, we haven't really introduced what exactly it is that we are talking about. Tires are relatively generic, but of course, if we are talking about all of this in so detail, we need to give some context around this. The toxic chemicals and microplastic pollution that tires can release cannot be the starting sentence. Similarly, through negligence and unscrupulous intent, some portion of these unused waste tires. So this is again something that will require some background behind this. Now, if you have been reading along, you would have figured out that there is only one sentence where we are actually introducing this entire concept of tires and tire wastage, and that is statement 1. Here we firstly introduce everything. Every year, the world discards around 30 million metric tons of car and truck tires. Now, everything after this will start to make relatively more sense. Of course, there is a lot of tire wastage, and because of which we have some sort of negligence, because of which we have toxic chemicals, so on and so forth. All of this start to make some sort of sense. But we have only figured out the starting sentence so far. What about the other four statements? We'll come to that in a moment. So, we have just given a basic introduction. Of course, we will have to continue describing the event. We cannot just directly move to the adverse impacts of this. We will have to have some sort of transformation in between. Do understand that most of the paragraphs are taken from some sort of an article, some sort of a book. And books and articles are written to be read and consumed by normal people like you and I. It is hardly going to be the case, it is hardly ever going to be the case where you will find something that is just incomprehensible garbage. At least if that is the case, you will find a lot of these articles, but it is unlikely that you would be tested on them. Cat RCs and cat verbal ability, regardless of how difficult it may seem, is still pretty basic. They will still test you just on your generic English, just on the basic concepts of English, that is your comprehension and whether you actually understand what it is that is given to you. Some of those comprehension passages are of course tough, but we already know how to deal with that. Coming back to this, we of course notice that of course there are 30 million metric tons of cars and truck tires. For then, what exactly it is that we fix after this particular statement? And so we try to find that statement. Let's move to statement 2. When tires end up in the world's oceans, their hollowed out donuts form can make them deadly for seas, specifically hermit crabs. Okay, so hermit crabs are a relatively new idea. We don't really think it might be a good idea to jump directly to the oceanic side of it, aquatic side of it. So we might have some other things in between as well. The majority of these are reclaimed and used in recycled materials or burned as fuel, but that still leaves millions of tires that end up in landfills or are dumped illegally. So I think if you think of it logically, you have 30 million wastes. Okay, out of the 30 million, some are going to be recycled, some are going to have some other uses, and some are going to be dumped. So statement 3 gives you that classification. That let's say this is the 30 million, some portion of it is going to be reclaimed and it will be recycled, some of it will be used as fuel, but some of it will be dumped illegally. And then what happens to those tires that are dumped illegally? That is something that we can discuss from then on. So 1 and then 3 makes a perfect sense here. We first introduce that there have been a lot of tires that are being wasted. We then explain what is happening to those tires. They are being recycled, they are being used as fuels, and then they are also being dumped illegally. You get all the three possibilities, and then you pick one possibility, that is the illegal dumping, that is the landfill dumping, and then you proceed ahead with that, because we have already gone through this statement, so we know that we are just talking about the wastage, we are just talking about the environmental impact of it. So what is the statement where we first begin to identify all of these facts? That is obviously statement 5, and we have already talked about that, that because these are dumped illegally because of negligence and unscrupulous intent, some portion of these unused waste tires will find their way into the world's ocean, where they can cause serious harm. So this makes sense that even within this particular category, there will be some that will be dumped into the ocean. So we are continuing with the idea that we have already presented in statement 3. Some are dumped illegally, and even within this category, there is a subcategory where these tires are being dumped out into the ocean. What then? What do we do with this particular information? We are obviously going to continue with this idea. What happens once these tires are dumped into the ocean? And we now have two sets of statements. Here we talk about hermit crabs, and in statement 4, we are talking about toxic chemicals. Let's just go through both of them. The toxic chemicals and microplastic pollution that tires can release into the environment are well documented, but how now new research suggests a new way that tires can endanger wildlife, their shape. And then what is that statement where we continue talking about their shape? We talk about the shape in this particular case, hollowed out donut form. So we first always introduce the generic idea and then further details around that. So even by just looking at these two statements, you could have figured out that statement 4-2 in that order has to be a mandatory pair. We've already figured out that 1 is the starting sentence, 3-5 is the continuous mandatory pair, and then 4-2 is another mandatory pair. There is no way where we could place 4-2 before 1-3-5 or 4-2 after 1 and before 3-5. So the only order that makes sense with for this particular parajumble is 1-3-5-4-2. We first introduced that there have been a lot of tires that are being dumped, that are being wasted. We then explain what exactly happens to those tires. We then take another subcategory and then we build on that particular idea, as in these are being dumped in a certain space, that is the ocean, and what exactly is the impact of these dumped tires in the ocean, specifically because of their shape. So 1-3-5-4-2 in that order makes perfect sense for this parajumble. Here we could not really figure out what the ending statement could have been. If we were just trying to look at trying to identify, if we were just trying to identify the final statement without actually trying to figure out what exactly would have preceded that, it would have been pretty difficult in this particular problem, but we could have still figured out the identifying the introductory statement, which is still pretty helpful. So let's move to the next question, where we again discuss the same concept just to solidify things. Again, I'll just urge you guys to pause the video for a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, try solving this on your own, and then look at the solution or the explanation. So firstly, we are just talking about a certain event. Okay, if we first try to identify the opening statement and then we try to figure out the ending statement, we don't really have a lot of options here. We can obviously say from there will require some sort of introductory statement before this. We need some context from where we need to understand where this there is coming from, what exactly this there refers to. We don't know that, so 4 cannot be the starting statement. The tour starts, we don't know what tour we are talking about, so 3 cannot be the introductory statement. When the time comes for those spirits, we again do not know what spirits we are talking about, what exactly this those spirits refer to. So we move to statement 1, which is still pretty generic in nature. Over 1500 miles away in Connecticut, the Westerfield Ancient Burying Grounds is filled with spine-chilling tales of witches, mysterious deaths, and historic funeral rites, which basically refers to those spirits that we are referring to in statement 2. So not only does one become our starting sentence, it also gives us a hint at the mandatory pair. That is 1, 2. We identify what all of these words are and then we refer to them collectively as those spirits in statement 2. So if we continue reading here, we can see that at a certain place something is happening. And when the time comes for those spirits to be resurrected each fall, the living travel far and wide to take in the spectacle. And then if we are talking about a certain travel, it makes sense to continue it with some sort of a tour. Okay? Travel and tour are still related ideas. We can still think of it as another mandatory pair that we have been able to link from here. The tour starts in the historic Isaac Stevens house, where a customed narrator talks about a family who lived there in the early 1800s, including little Henry, who died in the home. So we can say that 1, 2, and then 3 becomes a mandatory triplet. We'll just call it a mandatory triplet. And then finally, we arrive at statement 4. From there, from where? From this particular home. So we first introduce a certain statement, certain event, and then we talk about the details of that event. That a lot of people come here for a tour, and then we give the details of that tour. Starts from here, and from the starting, it goes to XYZ places, and then the XYZ places are given to us in the later half. From there, a guide leads spectators out to the burying grounds for more macabre stories from the past, and the tour finishes at the 1714 Butler Williams house, where another actor shares stories about the Weatherfield witch trials, which preceded the Salem witch trials by 30 years. So we are starting here, and then again, you can also think of it as some sort of a list. We are starting here, and then we are continuing here. We start, we continue. So obviously, 3, 4 becomes another mandatory pair. So this parajumble can easily solved with the order 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just to repeat this particular part out, it would have been easier to figure out this particular mandatory pair even without looking at or even without understanding what could have been the introductory statement. And then it would have also been easier to identify the opening statement here. It would have also been easier to look at what those spirits in statement 2 refer to. So overall, you identify the starting sentence, you identify the mandatory pairs, that is 1, 2, and 3, 4. So once you identify all of it, it is then a done deal. You place one at the introduction as the starting sentence of the parajumble. You form your mandatory pair. You identify the other mandatory pair. Then you only have one particular possibility, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, which also happens to be the answer of this particular parajumble. So we'll continue with more such examples in the coming few days. Best of luck, and let us know what you think of this video, whether we should continue making this or whether you need more such questions or any other content from our end, at least from the point of view of VARC. Thank you. See you guys soon.